Everybody have a good Thanksgiving? Wonderful? Awesome? No, not so good? Not sure? Thanksgiving's one of those weekends where, some of us are having a great time being with family, and some of us are having awful times. Some of us can't wait for the Thanksgiving weekend to be over with and for family to go home. Some of us can't wait to just keep on lingering. We were in North Jersey this weekend, and what turned out to be a 2-day kind of excursion, resulted in a 4-dayer. So we were there for 4 days with 2 days worth of clothes. But we did laundry and we made it. Thank you, sir. You heard my voice. And so I went into Thanksgiving this weekend with one rule. Not that I needed it. I like my family. I enjoy my family. But I wanted to do something a little special for my family that they didn't know I was doing, actually. And that was listening. I actually decided this Thanksgiving weekend that I was going to try and be the best listener I could possibly be. And nobody knew I was doing it. Isn't that fun? Weird? It has everything to do with my sermon today, actually why I was listening. But I was not only was I listening to the people I was talking to intently, because listening's quite wonderful, right? When you have someone listen to you, it's quite wonderful. When you listen to someone, you actually are giving them honor and dignity, right? To their conversation, to their thoughts, to their stories, to whatever they're saying. I mean, we love to have people listen to us. Spouses love their partners to have them listen to me. I know Allison, for me, she's like, man, if you'd only listen to me, right? We love to listen. We love to listen to baby's first words, right? We just, listening is really a wonderful expression of love and care. And I thought, well, even if the person doesn't know I'm listening to them intently, I'm going to do it. And bring them honor, bring them dignity. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I want to get out of a conversation. Anybody ever feel like that? Not with any of you here at Relevant. It's always non-relevant people. With you, I am so locked in. I want to be there for the long haul. But occasionally, you ever feel like a little stir-crazy from a little conversation? Maybe it's a story. Maybe it's some weird tale they're telling you again. Or just something you're just not interested in. They just want to hear themselves talk. So I decided every conversation this Thanksgiving weekend, I was going to be an amazing listener. And nobody complained, so I must have done a really good job. But one of the things I heard wasn't even actually as a result of a conversation. But I heard my son, Hudson, ask me to tell the story again. He said, at one time during the dinner table, he's like, hey, Dad, could you tell Uncle Steve the story? And so I retold the story that I'd been telling for the last couple of days. See, last weekend I wasn't here, and I love those of you who text me and apologize for not being at church last Sunday. I appreciate that. Well, you don't know I wasn't here either, and so I didn't miss you. I mean, like your lack of presence here, and I wasn't keeping attendance. I was at a soccer tournament last weekend. My kids play soccer, and Hudson in particular plays in a soccer tournament. Last weekend we were just kind of down the road in Howell. And it was a 2-day tournament, Saturday and Sunday. And I don't plan these things. I'm the coach of the team, but I got like a manager who's crazy about soccer and he plans all these things. And it's like a full day of soccer Saturday, full day of soccer Sunday. I would have much rather have been here, but it was the last weekend of the year. And there's something that happened that I'm so glad I didn't miss. We had 3 games, and then the last one in Colts Neck around 12:30 in the afternoon. We were playing a team that we knew we were better than. We'd played them before, and we beat them handily. We knew we were going to beat them again, so we tried to kind of spread out the goal scoring. You know when you're going to beat a team, and you just want some of your kids to score who hadn't scored? And we had some kids who just played hard all year. They hadn't scored at all. They were playing defense, so we were going to put them up. Some of them were Hudson's buddies, and at one point in the afternoon, I said, Hudson, why don't you go play offense and go score a goal? And he said to me, no, Dad, I want Danny to score a goal, and I want Dino to score a goal. So I said, okay, I'll put you in midfield, and let's have those guys score a goal. And And the story goes is that Hudson had 4 assists that day, which meant he assisted people in scoring their goals, which is not easy to do, but he had 4 of them. And 2 of them happened, well, one of them in particular, I won't exaggerate. One in particular, he was inside the box, just 12 yards away from the goal. He could have scored the goal, but he saw his buddy Danny just to the right of him, and he laid off a sweet, gentle ball for his buddy Danny, and he shot the ball into the goal, and Danny scored, and everybody celebrated, because Danny scored, and Dino scored, and Danny's mom came out and gave Hudson a hug. Like all the fans knew it. I was on the sideline. You should have seen video of me. I was right between 2 other coaches. And I'm like, no, he didn't. He passed it off. Are you kidding me? Hudson did that. He passed it off. And I was so excited, so proud of him, that I've been telling that story all weekend long. And at one point at the dinner table, when my brother-in-law hadn't heard that story, Hudson said, hey, Dad, tell Uncle Steve the story. And at that point, it hit me that there was something that Hudson was experiencing. He was listening to me retell a proud moment, a proud story, something that was a little out of the ordinary. It wasn't just telling the story of the goal he scored, right? But rather telling the story how he served his teammates, how he assisted his teammates and looked out for their interest in a moment that meant so much to them that he was willing to pass up like a sweet goal, another one, and lay it off for his buddy. But it was significant was that Hudson wanted me to retell that story. How often have you had that experience? Occasionally, right, there are stories you want retold about yourself. Maybe you don't have that experience anymore, but imagine as a kid, you have that experience. The Bible, I'm going to use my imagination a little bit, but I think the Gospels are full of some stories that God wanted retold. Not only God, but if you can imagine with me for a minute, God the Father and Jesus the Son sitting down and through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit deciding which stories in the Gospels get retold. See, like some stories, there's 4 Gospels, 4 recordings of the life of Jesus. And those 4 recordings of the life of Jesus, they read like newspapers reporters. They read like sports writers at a baseball game. And if you put 4 sports writers in a baseball game, watching the same game from different angles, reporting on the same inside the park home run that somebody hit, you're going to get 4 different versions, right? Of the same story told from 4 different angles, from a couple perspectives, all true, all inspired by the moment in time in history, yeah? And all appealing in a different way to the reader, right? And those of us, and to me, that's the Gospels. They're not contradictory. They're not contrary to each other. Matter of fact, they're complementary, and the whole 4 of them together bring about this great story, this great picture of the story of Jesus. And I can just imagine, because in John it says that not every story could be told, that there wouldn't be enough books, enough volumes of books to record all the stories of Jesus' life. And so somebody had to sift through, right? And so, the humans had their part in it, and Mark and Luke and John and Matthew, they all had their part in recounting and telling their story. But the Bible tells us they were all divinely inspired by God. And so I imagine part of the inspiration was God and Jesus sort of talking about which stories would be included, which stories wouldn't be. Could you imagine that? Right? That's not too far-fetched, right? Those guys sitting around, talking about their stories, talking about all that happened, recounting. And then Jesus saying, hey, God, will you retell that one? And there's a couple of stories in the scriptures where there's 4 of the same stories and almost exactly the same version. And today we're gonna kind of land on one of those. I want to prepare your hearts for Christmas. The history of this Christmas season is that we prepare our hearts for Christmas Day. We prepare our hearts for the coming of Jesus in a very traditional, ritual, ceremonial type way. We already know he's going to come. We can enjoy him today as much as we can enjoy him 25 or 27 days from now. But that moment, that tradition, that holiday was meant for us to kind of begin to anticipate, begin to prepare our hearts, begin to let God do a work in us so that we might come together in joy and happiness and celebrate and really appreciate and give thanks. And so that's what I'm hoping for the next couple weeks, the next couple Sundays, that you and me will begin to let God sort of prepare our hearts. Not only for that then, but also for every day. So I want to take you guys to Hebrews real quick. Hebrews frames out a little bit of the story. So if you can go to Hebrews for me. This is, we're going to use Hebrews, which is written after Christ's life, to Jewish people about the life of Jesus and their faith. And listen to what the writers of Hebrews says. It says, in the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom he also made the universe. That this Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. After he had provided purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the majesty in heaven. In the past, God spoke. Now that ought to just blow our minds right away. That there's a God in the universe, there's a God in the heavens, there's a God who's created all things, and that he has spoken to us. Are you kidding me? What? He has spoken to us? He has broken through all of this creation? He's broken through the storms. He's broken through all things. He's taken time to consider us and speak to us. See, this is referring to like a relationship that God not only just spoke the world into existence, but God in the past spoke to our ancestors, those who lived before us. Now you might say that's an assumption. Okay, God speaks. Of course God speaks, but the world doesn't believe God speaks, right? The world does not believe God speaks or God spoke or God breaks through into their life. The world does not believe that they can hear God. And some of you today are probably even thinking, there's no way. God does not speak to us. God has never spoken to me. And so Hebrews, who's writing to Jewish people who are facing persecution, who are thinking about leaving their faith, who are thinking about leaving things behind. Life has gotten tough. They've been in church and synagogue all their life. The things that they believed when they were children are not quite adding up anymore. Right? The faith like a child was way easier than the faith like an adult. And so these Hebrews are struggling with their own faith. And so the first opening line is, hey, in the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets. Now, that's how God spoke in times past. He used people. He used people to kind of carry his message to the rest of the people. And prophets weren't well received, by the way. Matter of fact, the prophets always ended up dead. Like, to carry the message of God, to carry what God was speaking to people, they were usually the most hated people in the land. They often were a little crazy, a little cuckoo. They did kind of weird things. They did things that God asked them to do. They were weird. They were strange. They were a little different. They were not well liked, sometimes persecuted. Quite often, they were killed. Matter of fact, in Matthew chapter 21, so if you go to that, Matthew chapter 21, Jesus tells a parable to the Pharisees, to the church people that day about this very thing. He says, listen to this parable. There was a landowner, a guy who owned land, and he planted a vineyard in the land. And he put a wall around it, and he dug a wine press in it, and he built a watchtower. What the world does that say? Then he rented, the star was in my way. Oh, what we do for the star. Then he rented the vineyard to some farmers, and he moved to another place. And when the harvest time approached, he sent his servants to the tenants to collect his fruit. The tenants seized the servants, and they beat one, and they killed another, and they stoned a third. Then he sent other servants to them, more than the first time, and the tenants treated them the same way. And last of all, he sent his son to them. They will respect my son, he said. Now hold on for a second, don't go to the next slide. What Jesus is talking about here is he's talking about the nation of Israel, times of old, the ancestors that Hebrews refers to. He's saying, look, I planted a vineyard. And I sent people in the vineyard to take care of the vineyard. They rented it from me. They were supposed to till the land, take care of the land, grow the fruit, grow the grapes, and that which grew in the vineyard. And I was going to send my servants. And in this parable, Jesus said, I sent my prophets. He sent my prophets to you. And every prophet he sent, he seized them. The people who lived in the land, the Israelites, they seized the prophets and they killed them. And then the landowner is thinking to himself, look, I'm going to send my son. They will respect my son, he said. And the parable goes on. Is there another verse? Yeah. But when the tenants saw the son, they said to each other, hey, this is the heir. Come, let's kill him and take his inheritance. So when they saw the son, God thought they would respect the son, but rather they didn't respect the son. Rather they saw that the son was the heir, that the son was the representative of God. Matter of fact, they said, let's kill him and take his inheritance. So they took him, they threw him out of the vineyard, and they killed him. Therefore, when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those tenants? He will, this is interesting, this is not part of the parable, but those who were listening to the parable, they said this in response. He will bring those wretches to a wretched end, they replied. And he will rent the vineyard to other tenants who will give him a share of the crop at the harvest time. Jesus said to them, have you never read in the scriptures that the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone? That the Lord has done this, and it is marvelous in our eyes. So then Jesus says, therefore I tell you that the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and will be given to people who will produce its fruit. And anyone who falls on this stone will be broken to pieces, and anyone on whom it falls will be crushed. And when the chief priests and the Pharisees heard Jesus' parables, they knew he was talking about them. They looked for a way to arrest him, but they were afraid. They were afraid of the crowd because the people held that he was a great prophet. See, the crowd thought that Jesus was a prophet. Jesus used to tell stories that literally when people heard those stories, they looked for a way to kill him. Isn't that interesting? Jesus would tell stories that would harden people's hearts in such a way because what happens when you are listening or speaking? Listening and speaking reveals the heart of God. It reveals our hearts as well. The story that is repeated 4 times in the Gospels is found in Luke chapter 9. Luke chapter 9, here's the story that's repeated 4 times that I really want to just encourage you to listen to. Let me set the context really quick. Another weird thing is happening in the scriptures, and that is Jesus has taken Peter and John, his disciples, and he's gone up to a mountain. And in this mountain, Jesus meets up in what's called the Transfiguration with Elijah and Moses. And on this mountain, Elijah and Moses, 2 prophets of old, speak with Jesus. Peter and John are hanging out. Peter and John see this sight. They say, hey, Jesus, let's set up some shelters. This is good for us to be here. We'd like to linger in this moment for a while longer. This is pretty cool. They see the glory of God. And it says this, while he was speaking, a cloud appeared and covered them. This is Elijah, Moses, and Jesus. It covered Peter and John. And it said they were afraid as they entered the cloud. And a voice came from the cloud saying, this is my son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him. This is my son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him. Now I want to have just a really sincere moment with you. For real. Okay? This is no preaching right now. This is like me sharing with you. This is amazing. Hebrews says, in times past, God has spoken, and he spoke to our ancestors through his prophets, but now he's chosen to speak to us through his son. And 4 times in the Gospels, God himself breaks through and speaks. If you look at the Christmas story, God doesn't say a word. Not a word at the birth of his son. He sends angels to speak. And angels speak to Mary, they speak to Joseph, they speak to Zechariah. His Holy Spirit is present. But God himself does not speak at all during the birth of Jesus. You know, if that was my son, I would be like telling everybody right there and then. Birth announcement, if I was God, it'd be crazy. And I would definitely have a voice in it. I mean, it'd be angels, it'd be shepherds, there'd be camels, there'd be dirty mangers, but I would definitely show up, say a few words. But no, like God is absolutely silent. God's silent through the birth of Jesus. He only breaks through twice from the heavens and speaks. Once when Jesus is baptized, he says, "This is my son whom I love and whom I'm well pleased." And you guys all kind of know that one. But this one, a little less memorable, but all the more powerful. Like he's saying, "This is my son whom I've chosen. Listen to him." Like, listen to him. 4 times. Everybody says it. Matthew says it, Mark says it, Luke says it, and John says it. And if 4 of the writers of the gospel story are saying it, I better listen to it. You see, my practice, my life, like how I live, isn't always in listening to God, as much as I like to say it is. Like, this is totally, really, so why did I go into Thanksgiving listening to my family members? Simply because of this. Like, wow, God, you've sent your son. In one of the supreme commands here, he's asking us to listen to him. Why? Because God has no longer chosen to speak through any other means, but now he broke through all of creation, and for this time period, because God wanted to reveal his heart, because God from the beginning of creation wanted to have a relationship with Jesus, because God from the beginning of creation wanted his heart to be known by us, he finally sent his son. See, they killed the prophets. See, God has always been trying to speak, and the world has always been trying to quiet him. See, he sent prophets to speak, and they killed him. And they sent his son to speak, and he said, listen to him. And those who listened to him had 1 or 2 responses. Either they fell in love with his words, because quite often they revealed his heart. Quite often they revealed Jesus' heart and their own as well. And so they fell in love with him, and they followed him, and they worshiped him, and they wanted more of him, and they sat at his feet, and they stopped doing things they normally would do. They dropped their nets and followed him. They went and told other people, hey, this guy has told me everything about me. You've got to come and see him. That's weird, right? Like to have all your secrets revealed and then go to your town and be like, guess what? This guy told me everything about me. You guys should meet with him. You should talk to him too. You should listen to what he has to say. The whole story of the gospel, the whole story of the Bible, is God wanting to have a relationship with his people, God wanting to speak with us and speak, and for us to speak with him, and finally he does that through his son, who Hebrews chapter 1, not only does he speak to his son, but he says about his son that he is the exact representation of God, that he is the very imprint of God. In other words, he's the exact representative of God. Like to know God the Father, all you have to do is know Jesus. God has spoken through to us. So we get to listen to Jesus through his Holy Spirit. This literally has blown my mind this week. This very little simple thing. I wrote a couple things about it I want to share. See, the words of man, they convey weight and power, right? They convey love. But the words of God, they carry life. They carry saving power and saving love. The words of man, they exert wonderful and mighty influence in the world, right? But God's words, they are creative deeds. And they give what they speak. That's awesome. They give. When God speaks forgiveness, he actually gives it. When God speaks love, he actually gives love. When God speaks healing, he actually gives it. They're amazing words with great power, with great weight. And so he gives his son to us, with us and in us. The idea of listening, the idea of speaking, also in turn means the idea of hearing. And the idea that we can know what the power and the joy of God speaking to us is. The words of God unfold what God is working in us and direct us to reveal what is in our hearts. I love that it says, "This is my son who I love and am well pleased," and it doesn't stop there, but it says, "Listen to him." So my challenge personally this week for me has been, Anthony, are you in a personal acquaintance relationship with Jesus? Or are you in a personal relationship with Jesus? Like, am I just personal acquaintances? Like, to know about somebody, to understand somebody, it's way different than to listen to somebody. So my way of responding right to this was like listening to all my family members during Thanksgiving. And in that, I started realizing what listening does as I was doing it intentionally. It's like, wow, yeah, this is good. Do I listen to God this way? Do I just linger in God's presence and just let him talk to me? Do I let him tell me his stories? You know, when you listen to somebody, you really like discover their personality, right? And God has this great personality. I don't know if you guys know it. Like, he's got a really amazing personality. Like, there's some things he does that annoys me. Right now I can't remember them. But he's ultimately got this wonderful personality. In the past, he spoke through our ancestors through prophets, but now he's speaking us to his son. And when Jesus comes on the scene, this is God saying, I'm here. I'm here, and I want to be in your life. I'm here, I've entered humanity, and I want to talk with you. I want to speak with you. I want to be listened by you, and I want to listen to you. Right? There's no more, let's face it. Ultimately, to define a personal relationship with somebody, it's in your ability to listen to them, yeah? Like when you sit across a table, if you don't listen to the other person, then you've got no relationship. Or if they don't listen to you, right? He never listens to me. I'm going to break up with him. Right? He doesn't love me. He doesn't care about me. He doesn't know me. Like the art of listening, and there are way better people who can talk about listening better than I can, but the act and art of listening, the joy of listening, that sums up relationship, doesn't it? That sums up personal, intimate relationship. And so I just want to encourage you this Christmas season, maybe to begin by listening again. Begin by becoming a real good, way better listener. You know, I want to listen to God usually when I have some crazy urgent need. I'm like, speak to me for goodness sakes. Show me a sign. Tell me what to do. But this idea of sitting at the table with him and lingering and letting him decide what we're going to talk about, yeah. So I love this. I'm going to just encourage you to just linger in this. I want you to I just ultimately want to do today is just spark your imagination. Spark maybe something within you that would hopefully just make you turn a little bit more towards God in this next couple of weeks and ask him and just listen with him. Listen to him. Allow him to speak with you. Because if you're listening, you'll hear things, yeah? If you're listening, you'll hear things. So God is speaking to us now through his son. In the Christmas story, when God sends Jesus, he's now speaking. We're going to receive communion now. I'm going to ask Miguel and the team to come on up. We've got a few more minutes. And I'm going to just invite you to listen, okay? I invite these guys to play and sing. I invite you to listen this morning. You know, sometimes listening is actually a skill, yeah? Right? Some of us are much better at this than others. Some of it comes naturally. But listening is a skill. It doesn't always come easy. So we're going to just do some practice this morning. If you're new here and you don't know Jesus as your Savior, you don't know this God who speaks, I think we can all relate to what I'm about to say, and that is this, that the first movement actually towards Christ, if you remember back when, the first movement towards Christ is that you heard his voice, right? Like somewhere in the beginning of your faith, you heard Jesus speak to you. You heard him speak to your heart. You heard him call you. You heard him nudge you toward faith. You heard an invitation from Jesus to come to him, right? How many of you heard him when you first came to faith? Yeah? That's like the first step. Matter of fact, our job, the rest of us, those who have faith, what we really have to do is create the best possible environments for people to have the opportunity to listen to God, to hear God for themselves for the very first time. That's an amazing moment, right? When you hear God for yourself for the very first time, it's like hearing your baby say its first words. It's like hearing your boyfriend or girlfriend say, I love you. It's like hearing, the so-and-so say, I do. It's like hearing my mom say at Thanksgiving dinner, hey, Anthony, after the lasagna, do you want turkey leftovers? That's a wonderful sound in my ear. That's a beautiful moment where you hear something. And the first movement of people who come to faith in Jesus is the ability to hear God's voice. It's fundamental to our faith. That as we grow older and as we grow away from, and more mature, sometimes we forget to listen to God. So maybe this is a returning to a childlike faith where Jesus says, hey, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven unless you become like a little one and you just listen. We just want you to retell stories, right? How fun would it be if our time with God was, hey God, will you tell me that story again? Will you retell me the story when you did this in my life? I just think God does not want to just answer your prayers. He literally wants to just sit with you. He wants to just have Thanksgiving dinner with you. He wants to tell you his stories. See, because I believe in the midst of that relationship, in the midst of when you're in the presence with God, when you're with him, all your prayers are answered. Trust me. Your prayer for healing is answered. All the prayers you're saying right now, when you are in God's presence and you sit across from the table with him and he tells you his stories, I mean, you think he would tell you exactly what you need to hear that moment, right? But maybe he wanders off and tells you some crazy story about something. You're like, God, what does that have to do with my thing, Lord? But I want you to know that in the presence of God, in the very presence of God, you are in the very place where he will answer all your prayers. Your prayers are answered by virtue of just him. He does that. So we're going to just listen for a little while. And then I'll come back up and take the bread and the cup together, representing Jesus, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. You guys can sing, and if you want to sing along, you can, but if you just need to listen, then you can listen.